Few things really make me mad in Washington, D.C., but this article in Politico really just takes the cake. Because what it does is it shows exactly how far the swamp will go to try to undermine elected officials. It doesn't matter that the elected official in this case happens to be President Joe Biden. U.S. diplomats, as they say, well, these are actually people who work at the State Department. We don't know if they're diplomats. We don't know if they're low-level employees. All we know is they're people who are filing, who have a disagreement with the Biden-Israel policy. Now, note the Biden-Israel policy is anything but strong. It is really lukewarm kind of accommodation that has to be that they've decided they have to do. Every single thing that they do in favor of Israel always has demands that Israel have ceasefires or a pause, and it's all contingent upon Israel taking actions to not defend their own interests. But be that as it may, the foreign policy establishment does not have a right to counteract that, to attempt to undermine that policy, and just because they have a difference of opinion. Here's the strange thing, and I'm just going to let you see this. Because to me it's outlandish. There is a ability at the State Department to put in dissent if you have a dissent on something that's going on, and to put in a memo of dissent. Okay, that's fine. The problem is a bunch of these people made it public and turned it into a public document that undermines the U.S. policy. The memo wants the U.S. to support a ceasefire. Note anything familiar? Well, the ceasefire is the banner that all the leftists or Palestinians are carrying around as they attack the White House. So the ceasefire is nothing more, nothing less than an undermining Israel's ability to defend themselves. Let's be clear, that's what it is. And then they also want to talk about the treatment of Palestinians by Israel. Come on, get over it. The Hamas attacked Israel. And yet the foreign policy establishment, at least some of the foreign policy establishment, is now trying to publicly undermine the U.S. support for Israel for a quote unquote more balanced approach that actually is a pro-Palestinian approach, which is an approach that supports Hamas, which is an approach that Rashid Tlaib would support. Let me be clear. These people they have a right to have a different opinion. What they do not have a right is, once the president moves forward with his options, with what he chooses to do, the elected official, they do not have a right to undermine that policy. They have a responsibility as civil servants to fulfill that policy, to enact that policy to the best of their ability. The time for discussion ends when the policy decision has been made. And yet these underlings believe they're in some kind of alternative world where if they put a petition out, they can alter policy as opposed to doing their jobs. The minute you take a civil service job, you are saying, I will pull the levers of power for who's ever in power, even if I don't agree with the policy that's being implemented. That is your job. What you trade is you get to have input on the policy. You also get an ability to not be fired very easily. You get to work very few hours compared to the rest of us. And you get to do it in a relatively comfortable environment with relatively high pay. That's what you get. What you don't get is a right to undermine the elected officials. I don't care if the elected official is Donald Trump or the elected official is Joe Biden. You do not get the right to undermine the elected official. You are not elected, Mr. Public Servant. So shut up and do your job. This is why we need to drain the swamp. This is why we need civil service reform. This is why Americans for Limited Government is committed to pushing through real civil service reform, which will allow people who publicly go against U.S. policies decided by the President of the United States, the elected President of the United States, to be fired. It's that simple. With that, this is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government.